Let's make sense of this.
Let's make sense.
Sensemakers.
Hey, Keith.
Hey, Robert.
Hey, Jonathan.
Hey, Robert.
Nice to see y'all back from the Tableau Conference. Did y'all have a good
Yes.
time?
Yeah, I had a great time.
Very good
Just
time.
in late last night.
Fantastic. Yeah, I can't wait to hear more about it. This year I watched from afar, didn't really get to see much more than the keynote, which, from where I sat was a little disappointing. So I'm interested to hear if you had a different perspective. I think we've got a unique dynamic here that, you guys were there on the ground, going to the sessions, meeting all the people, and I wasn't. So maybe I've got that perspective of the person who is a customer who wished they could go, or just maybe casually watched the keynote or saw some things online. But yeah, I'm interested to hear
Yeah.
your thoughts, but I have to say that I expected a lot more
Mm.
from this year's keynote. I expected more of a bold vision. Given the progress that we've seen and all the hype and all the advancement with AI, I expected to see a lot more from Tableau in terms of either what they're close to releasing or just what they intend to try to work on. What is their vision for that fourth wave of analytics that we heard them talk about, wave 1, 2, 3, 4, and what is this fourth wave? I wanted to hear a lot more about that in a concrete sort of a way. I'm afraid I didn't hear much. Honestly, and I hope I'm not sounding too terribly cynical here, but the thing that I was the most excited about from the keynote was Google Fonts integration. I mean, truly, one of my old colleagues mentioned on LinkedIn, he was like, I bet Robert was really interested in that feature because I've been waiting for it for a long time. I was like, yeah, you're right. What about y'all? What was your just kind of overall feel from the event?
Yeah, at that stage, I'd be curious of Jonathan's take. At that stage, when I was there in the keynote room, I was disgruntled. And I was thinking, like, in today's 2024 landscape, that was April 30th, 2024. Like, the measure of success is how many H100s do you have and how much compute can you force at your AI model. And we're releasing fonts, and that gets the largest applause in the auditorium.
Get ready for 12 brand new Google Fonts.
So I can see what you're saying, Robert, and there's more, right? So I left that thing saying, God, what is this thing? And I went to every hands-on session I could. I was in the front row in a lot of seats, and I did my best to assemble, like, okay, so what's actually going on here? And I got to say that thinking about it on the flight home, I've actually kind of identified that there was a little bit of a bifurcation where the high-level messaging might have been a miss, but under the hood, which is where we focus a lot at Action, because we have this thesis that when you know how things work, you can work with them. Under the hood, there's a lot that has been released and a lot of progress was made. And I just felt like the keynote didn't necessarily do the best job of communicating to those who were watching from afar what that was. Jonathan, what was your take?
For my part, I'm always putting things into kind of what is the context, like what is behind this. And the keynote did feel like it needed, if I split the keynote into two parts, like there's the devs on stage and then there's the vision, the future announcements.
Yeah.
The vision, future announcements needed at least another week of time to refresh. So it kind of highlights just how new it is. And then there's the devs on stage stuff, which I found really exciting in a lot of ways. Yes, it's not the overarching vision. It's more, here are targeted features for specific things, and we can talk more about those. So going back to this vision piece, just looking at the history of Tableau over the last few years and talking with the devs over time, and trying to not to speak out of school here. Just they do have an NDA with Tableau, so I have to
Mhm.
be
Sure.
be clear about that. But Tableau was bought by Salesforce in 2019, and then COVID hit, and so a lot of that communication and sitting around having dinner together afterwards, after a day of meetings, and that kind of bonding that happens, and the cultural mixing just didn't get to happen. And
Mm.
it turns out Salesforce and Tableau have different cultures in how they do things. And then Tableau ultimately went through multiple CEOs and changes of leadership and changes of direction. And the feeling that I got from people is Tableau's kind of getting its legs under it again.
Mm-hmm.
And so in some ways I see the lack of polish and the completeness that maybe we've been used to from 2019 and earlier, for those of us long timers, some of that wasn't there because it's
Yeah.
Tableau's trying to figure out who we are, what do we do, what are our priorities.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of
Yep.
sense. And at the same time, what I did see, I had a little bit of exposure to some of the Tableau execs. And Southard especially had a real sense of pride in terms of their recent throughput in putting out the door these underlying deeply technical developments that that kind of move things forward. And he told me he feels like they're on the horse now, getting these things out the door. But it does make sense to me, given those circumstances, that there could have been a little bit of couple of years of just needing to get their sea legs under them again.
So in terms of
Mhm.
advancement and development, I think back to when we had basically the same conversation last year. And one of the
Mm,
things that was really a key message was the bifurcation of the data layer and the presentation layer. How
yep.
there
Mhm.
was going to be this whole standalone component in the data layer that could be the headless BI thing and all that
Mhm.
sort of stuff. And I was disappointed that I didn't hear very much about that. There were a few
Mhm.
key things, multi-fact and a long-awaited feature, I think, for you, Keith, where you could finally join together some published data sources. But I didn't hear this cohesive vision for like semantic layer and data layer in a foundational way. Am
Yeah.
I wrong about that? What did you learn
No, you're
from
right about that.
I'm
It wasn't mentioned it wasn't clear in the keynotes. They might have had some feature names that didn't make sense with the vocabulary, but in the sessions, all of that stuff came true. And that's what I'm really describing, Robert, is that when I went to the sessions and I went to the hands-on trainings and I looked at the actual raw material that has come out of Tableau, I was really, really satisfied that a lot of that stuff is there. It's all there. And when we looked at a week or two ago before the conference, what do I expect? I was saying I'm going to look and see, are they inflating a balloon? I said around AI, are they just kind of blowing hot air? I'm going to be looking for. I'm going to be looking for advancements on the announcements that were made last year because so far none of that stuff has hit my desk. And what I was able to see is my takeaway were two big words, two key words from the conference. The first one is this new word, composable. I encountered this word composable in a lot of different circumstances, and I'll dig into what I could figure out that it means. And the second big word is API. Everywhere I went at that conference, it was API this, API that, API the other. So to me, those two things, Robert, they fit in to deliver upon exactly what you're saying that you didn't see in the keynotes. So we've got this concept of composable data sources now where I can federate the join between two data sources, and I can take one data source that you've built as a composable thing and then use that in the composition of my data source downstream. We've got these things called composable analytics where I can take, analytics that I've built and put them up onto the cloud marketplace, internal and external marketplace. And you can use the analytics that I've built. I can package them up and sell them to you inside of my organization or on Tableau Cloud. And then there's this concept of composable assets, where I can, take the assets that exist inside of Tableau, could be the data itself through the VizQL data service and this headless BI thing, and reuse those and embed those in the workflow, in the work stream where the user is. And so a lot of those two things are delivered with all of these new APIs and with the new VizQL data service. And so seeing those things come to light in the sessions actually helped me to feel a lot better about that bifurcation that I was so excited about last year.
Jonathan, what's your take on all the new stuff?
Um, I've got I'm mixed. um, so I agree with Keith about a lot is composable, and the other word that comes to mind for me is ecosystem. That historically, in a number of ways, Tableau has been kind of a dead end tool. That we can make a viz and we can see it in Tableau Cloud, Tableau Server, and so on. But then what do we do next? And then over time, Tableau has added some APIs. There's a lot more emphasis on the embedding API nowadays, so we can put that inside Tableau. There's they announced the Teams integration that was promised years ago, and the devs were saying the Teams integration actually goes further than the Slack integration in some ways. So having the integration with Databricks that was announced. And then we haven't even mentioned Viz extensions yet. So being able to have the extensions that you need for your business in the way that you want to see the data, having that as a possibility that you can run yourself. There was a hands-on training and I built an extension in an hour and a half. And not being somebody who identifies as a JavaScript or CSS coder, I'm able to take the example code and turn something out for me. I just see lots of possibilities there. And then getting into things like the headless BI, where Tableau's decoupling itself in assorted ways and then able to tie into the business in ways that matter more for what the business needs. So I just love seeing at the end of the devs on stage, there was, they'd gone through this demo of this workflow and then tying it in, and there was an Apple Watch app.
Yep.
And so for me, thinking some about kind of what the promise of business intelligence in some ways has been missed because we're focused too much on building charts and graphs. And that what it really matters is it comes down to people using data for making decisions and taking action in the world. And Tableau's making it easier for us to do that in the tool.
Yep, I loved seeing that import Swift on the screenshot. Where they actually built the approval workflow into an Apple Watch OS app, and that to me is the real thing. Is composable API ecosystem extension. I left saying gone are the days where we're right-clicking ourselves to death to build a guided analytics dashboard that nobody uses anyway. That era is behind us, but it doesn't necessarily mean that Tableau's era is in a pause in any way. All they're doing is ripping it up and having us programmatically go at this thing to extend it, to integrate it, and to really work it into the overall ecosystem of the infrastructure where Tableau is running and the workflow of where the user is working.
So listening to you both describe all of that, I'm hearing a very interesting and very fundamental shift from the early days of Tableau, where drag and drop was a meme. It was a t-shirt. It was a song and a dance leading up to the conference, drag and drop, and everything in the tool is just a right click away. And now what I'm hearing is API and programmatic and app development and extensions and code. Um, does that actually make it less accessible? I don't know. I like that, that is just a normal part of a product maturing and being extensible and customizable for situations that the company itself just, may not have the resources or may not need to devote the resources to special cases. So it is nice to have your own way of meeting your own needs through custom development. And I have to say, with Viz Extension, some of the more exciting things that I did see in the keynote and sort of the online conversation were those things that were not developed by Tableau or Salesforce. It were the
Mhm.
things that were developed in this space of extensibility and viz extensions. I think that's a really fundamental shift here.
Yeah. And to that end, it's been one of the things, like I come from a background of working in nonprofits. And so cost of implementation in different way, perceived cost of license versus total cost of ownership, lots of debate there. And one of my kind of operating theories has been, and we've gone this far without mentioning AI, which I love, but now I'm going to bring it in, is part of the promise of AI actually makes a lot of that coding easier. That what took a more advanced developer in a lot of the simpler cases, somebody who's enabled to buy a GPT or an Einstein, for example, can now do more. And so in that way, the code being text is more shareable. I think there's some really interesting opportunities there for that. Whereas things that were hidden within 3 levels of a nested dialogue of configuring an action filter in Tableau, or like the Flurledge twin Sankey chart that is absolutely brilliant, but it's 7 levels of nested table calculations that are just, it's too complicated. Whereas anybody can look at the D3 code for a Sankey chart and have a chat GPT explain it to you.
Yeah.
Yep. And you can build your own card on the Marks card in order to adapt that D3 chart to your needs and have the AI assistant help you with rubbing out the code along the way.
So that's a clear part of the future. And so I'm interested to hear more of your thoughts, predictions about where do you think we're headed next? What I see in the AI space so far is that it's an assistant with content creation. It'll help us create more and more workbooks, more calculations, more extensions, produce more stuff.
Generate.
Um, but then how do we organize it? Where is the component that's going to help us keep our content organized and navigable? Are you seeing anything in that space? And besides that, what are you seeing is the near-term future?
That's actually one of my concerns as well, is there's already in so many organizations this kind of wild west of published data sources and workbooks and multiple definitions of metrics and so on. And some of the ideas behind Tableau Pulse are to enable some level of consolidation and definition of that, potentially in the future creating situations where pulse metrics could be used inside other calculations and things so on, so you can have that single source of truth. I don't, like in what Tableau talked about, their story is not really dealing with that governance piece of it. And then there's also the with the data itself, what is the governance necessary so AI can be pointed at it and get good results?
My flat answer to your question, Robert, is no. I didn't see any single announcement that utilized AI or anything in the machine learning space to make the tidiness or the organization of an information architecture more concrete within an organization. And I'll give you an example of a few places where I had these sort of like, ooh, caution ahead sort of thoughts. One is when they demoed that Einstein Copilot was prompting the analyst with which questions to ask. Like, I don't know if I want to substitute for critical thinking, right? I was on a troubleshooting call with somebody earlier today, and he said, "Oh, I Googled for it, but I didn't think to solve it in this other way." And I was like, "That's because you were outsourcing your critical thinking to the Google machine instead of critically analyzing what was happening in front of you." And I'm concerned if we mass produce that offloading of critical analysis and critical thinking skills from the analyst to a machine that tells them which questions to ask, that's going to be a problem. Another big source of concern that I had was the version of Einstein Copilot that ships this summer. I mean, it's nice in the demos, you kind of have a dialogue with it. You say, hey, this is what I'm looking for, and it throws some pills up on the screen. You move those pills on the canvas 2 or 3 or 4 steps forward, and you work with what it gave you. Then you ask it a question, and it does something, and it's this sort of human machine sort of co-authorship. But the version that ships this summer won't be aware of the level of detail of the data source you're connecting to. And so how can you ship an AI assist that doesn't know the granularity of the data and have it produce accurate calculations and pill arrangements for you? You can't. And I'm just concerned that it's a little bit of that wild west rush to get stuff out at the expense of the accuracy of what we actually do here, guys, is we work with data to get accurate answers for people.
For my part on that, for me, that's no worse than what happens for a lot of people when they ask for advice on the internet. Is that a lot of the advice on the internet is making assumptions about the data based on what that helper has previously seen, which is exactly what the AI is doing, and the people are spitting out answers. And that honestly works. Yeah, and that works a lot. So it's kind of like an 80-20 sort of thing that, yes, 80% of the time it'll work because 80% of the time it's the most common situation. Yep.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of interesting things. A lot to look forward to. Some things that we wish we could look forward to that maybe aren't happening, but we'll see. Certainly looking forward to next year again in San Diego, and what happens in between. A lot of developments happening outside of Tableau, things that I'll talk about on another podcast here that will be coming up shortly about the Data Universe conference. But there's a lot happening out there in the analytics world. And so it'll be interesting to see how those things develop in contrast with the Tableau and Salesforce vision and some of the up and comers that are trying to take advantage of all of the AI stuff. So, thanks guys for filling me in on the conference that I missed this year, but perhaps we'll meet up next year.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. Thanks, Robert.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks,
See you soon.
guys.
All right.
Bye.
Let's make sense of this.
Let's make sense.